We are very honored to have Mr. Remer Rietkerk, head of Esports Newzoo, who will deliver an overview Esportification as the game changer to us. Total esports audience is also expected to reach 495 million people. The market continues to mature in diverse ways with innovative revenue streams, new monetization methods, content formats, and mobile esports, all shaking up the esports business. Remer will be sharing the latest trends, the huge business potentials, and what the new normal esports playbook looks like. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome Remer.
Hello and welcome to Esportification as a game changer. We're going to take you through all the latest trends and happenings in the esports industry. My name is Remer Rietkerk, and I'm the head of esports here at Newzoo. Background on me, I've been in this position for a little over a year. Prior to that, I spent 4 years at Riot Games working on the business ecosystem of the European esports scene. And all of that culminated in leading the franchising process in 2018, where we transitioned the EULCS to the LEC, which launched in 2019. Some background on Newzoo if you're unfamiliar. Newzoo is the market leader when it comes to business intelligence for the games and esports space. We have a platform which is a single destination for anyone with an interest in games. From there, you can get up-to-date data points on all the relevant things happening in the industry, as well as our reports. We have consumer insights, where we get you the deepest insights on gamers and game fans. And we have these comes in both syndicated and custom form. So we are always happy to work with clients on their own custom needs when they want to do market research on the audience. We also do consulting. So if you have custom needs and custom strategic needs, we have a team here that can help ensure that you have the right information and the right strategy to approach the market in an effective way. So let's look at some of the top line numbers. Esports revenues this year will be 950 million. This is down 0.8% compared to 2019. This is driven in part by COVID, which we'll get into. But the fundamentals remain strong, with the industry looking to grow to 1.6 billion by 2023. People are still interested in esports and they still want to watch, and COVID has only been slightly hampering it. When it comes to the overall revenue globally, China will generate 36% of global revenues. China is the strongest esports market with 340 million. Following that would be Europe and North America, who take about 23% of the global revenue, and the rest of the world sharing the remaining 18%. The audience is quite healthy as well and remains completely unhampered, if anything, accelerated by COVID. There are 495, so almost 500 million esports fans this year, with 223 million of them being esports enthusiasts, fans who watch more than once a month, and 272 million being occasional viewers, or sort of the long tail of the market, people who watch less than once a month. This number is anticipated to grow to 646 million globally by 2023, with almost 300 million being esports enthusiasts. So it's exciting, and the fundamentals remain quite strong for the market. But it is 2020, and so pretty much every presentation in 2020 has to start tackling COVID. And to be frank, COVID's been a bummer. While some of the mainstream press talk about how esports must be booming with the stay-at-home orders, I think we understand it's a bit more of a mixed bag. Esports is, after all, still very much in a growth phase, often dependent on investment capital to continue to drive the industry forward. It's also very dependent on consumer brand marketing spending. This means that the current market conditions could leave many players in the space in a fairly precarious position. And that translates to the revenue front. We've seen growth halt in the esports space, with some elements going into decline. As we know, while gaming is a non-cyclical business, esports' dependence on consumer brand marketing spending makes it much more susceptible to a global downturn. When markets are uncertain, companies will often seek to cut spending in order to ensure they have a war chest to survive a market crash. One of the easier areas to cut is marketing spending. As such, unless the COVID crisis is resolved soon, we may be looking at a longer period of pain when sales funnels stay dried up and renewal talks start to falter. Anyone engaged in the venue and live events business has been especially hard hit. Without live events to attend, ticket sales are down, and merchandise, which is often in the sports industry and the esports industry, an impulse buy at the venue, has also declined. We've also seen lost value in the sponsorship and media rights space with canceled events. Speaking of canceled events, it has been one of the biggest detractors to the value drive in the core industry. Not on this list is ESL One Rio, which has also been canceled. While many commentators observe the uptick we must have seen in viewership, that has in many ways been offset by these cancellations and postponements. As we know, many of esports' biggest ecosystems, such as Dota and CSGO, are driven heavily by top tier majors focused on international competition. And the top teams from North America, Latin America, Europe, and China coming together to play for the title. With the restrictions on flying and the competitive integrity problems with playing on high ping, this has meant that the key viewership drivers for much of the esports space is not there. The lack of high profile tournaments has, in many ways, offset the games for more people staying at home watching esports. And that translates in the numbers as well. What you see here is that streaming in general is up 70% year over year compared to the same period in 2019. So and hours watched is, we've seen 17.8 billion already on Twitch and YouTube Live across 2020. However, when it comes to esports specifically, we've seen that esports hours watched compared to last year have actually dropped by 1%, but the hours broadcasted has also dropped by 25%, which essentially means that more people in a way are watching esports if they find stuff that's relevant to them. The problem is just that you do not have as much content, as much of that key global content to help drive the value in the industry. And mobile esports is one of the most exciting things happening and remains unfazed by COVID, right? If you look at the total esports hours watched of these three key titles, if you look at 2018, 2019, 2020, year to date, basically Q1 through Q3, it's exploded. I mean, we're already well over in all of these titles, we're well over the 2019 total numbers. People are really engaged by it, right? And it seems sudden and massive growth. One of the most important and interesting things about this is where that viewership is coming from. These titles are succeeding in mobile first gaming markets, which are often developing countries. Prior to the ban, for example, PUBG Mobile was an enormous hit and explosion in India. And a lot of the esports hours for PUBG Mobile was coming out of India, which has traditionally been not an esports market with not a lot of esports content. And you also see this translate to the platforms, right? If you look at where it's being broadcasted, 75% of the hours broadcasted on for mobile esports has been on YouTube, but 98% of the hours watched have been on YouTube, which tells us that the market and the audience is really a YouTube first market, similar to the markets where these titles are popular. And we see this cut across the games as well, right? So if you look at the mobile share of total games revenues, places in Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Asia see as high as 95, 93, 91% of the total games revenue coming from mobile. This, on the other hand, is much lower in some of the more traditional, for example, Western esports markets like France, UK, Canada, the US, and Russia, where it's around 33 to even as low as 18%. And this also translates in the titles that are engaged and interested in these markets, right? Because these people don't necessarily have high-end phones and they don't have access to PCs. But what they do have is a desire to play competitive gaming. So games like PUBG Mobile and Free Fire and PUBG Mobile Lite have access to anywhere between 86 to 98% of the market. And that's translating to high interest in these developing regions, whereas games like Fortnite, which are much more demanding in their requirements, are not seeing as much success in those markets. And where there's competitive gaming, mobile esports will follow. So one of the most exciting things to see is going to be to see how esports develops in markets like India, Indonesia, and in the Middle East, places which traditionally have not had a strong esports scene. We've also seen a growth in investments this year. Year to date, we've already beat all previous records when it comes to both number of deals and the total deal volume for the year. We saw a certain growth in 2018 when you saw a lot of the franchising occurring, where lots of money was being poured into buying franchise slots in many of the different esports ecosystems. Volume declined a little bit in 2019, but it's back stronger than ever. And this is despite some of the big concerns around around COVID and around the revenue. What it tells us is that investors continue to look at the space as having incredibly strong fundamentals and are not fazed by some of the hiccups we've seen when it comes to revenue growth, which is a view we share. So it remains a very exciting space for esports and for investors. When it comes to brands, well, some of the new sales we've seen slow down a bit with concern around spend. We have seen renewals. So the people that are already there in esports are continuing to reinvest in it. And what we see from these renewals is that they are finding value because some non-endemics like BMW, OnePlus, and Marvel all took gambles on esports and entered the space, right? And they've chosen in every case to extend, maybe not even 1 year, but 2 years in the case of Team Liquid, or expanding the scope in the case of OnePlus, or in the case of Cloud9, they really ramped it up and made a global initiative. And we see that where not only did they renew with Cloud9, but they also added 4 other teams to the mix. So they included Fnatic, G2, China's Fun Plus Phoenix, and T1 from Korea, and created a global united rivalry campaign where they position themselves as the partner of the greatest esports teams globally, which is created very interesting narratives and activations around it. And this signals that BMW has looked at their initiative with Cloud9 and said, not only have we gotten value out of this, but we want to invest further. So while some new entrants may be hesitant to enter the market now, it does suggest that once market stability has been restored globally, we'll see further increases in investment in the space. We've also seen more complex brand integrations. So a great example from Worlds 2020, which happened in Shanghai, was they created a music video. So League of Legends, Riot Games, its publisher and developer, they regularly create music videos and music around the game. And every year they have a world championship song, which includes a music video, which gets a lot of viewership. And they found ways to do more complex brand integration. So throughout the video, you saw integrations of some of the key sponsors of the event, like Mercedes-Benz, Oppo, Alienware, and Secret Lab. And in doing so, what we found is that what they've done is they found creative new ways to bring value to sponsors and to inject value and to inject the IP and blend it together. This is building off the success they had in 2019, where they did a very complex activation with Louis Vuitton, where they did not just a trophy case, but a music video and skins designed by Louis Vuitton and collaborative clothing line, which sold out very quickly. So in doing so, they're finding new ways to deliver value to sponsors and finding new ways to really capitalize on the uniqueness of esports and games IP to generate value for everyone in the industry, which is good because esports fan monetization remains a challenge. While sponsorship is quite healthy and doing quite strong, media rights continues to be a bit of a struggle. Esports is not like traditional sports where fans don't mind which channel shows their sport. They have their stickiness tools on different platforms to help keep fans attached to that platform, right? And so things like exclusivity haven't been as successful in driving viewership away from one platform to another, which means that media rights revenues compared to traditional sports is depressed. Advertising as well, you don't see as much return on the actual in-stream advertisements being sold compared to traditional sports, and people who are buying that advertising space are less willing to spend as much as you might see on a linear television. Match day revenues are also smaller than in traditional sports, whereas in traditional sports you have the ability to fill a stadium very successfully with lots of fans week in, week out for every match and every game. Typically, full stadiums are only sold in esports around the biggest events. And this is driven by a combination of the fact that when you're present in an esport event, often when you're actually watching the game, you're watching something similar to what you'd be watching at home on stream, as well as the fact that esports fans are very spread out, right? People who are fans of a certain game are spread all over the world and all over the region, and they're not as concentrated to come and watch their home team play every week. So all of these traditional sports revenue pillars remain underdeveloped. But innovation like digital goods and direct-to-consumer products are one of the solutions that we're seeing in the industry. Lots of organizers and publishers have been experimenting with over-the-top viewership content, right? This is things that, well, the primary broadcast will remain free, doing things like creating special behind the scenes content or special cameras where you can watch directly what your favorite pro is doing is a way to create value for fans that can be monetized directly in a D2C format and bring in new revenue streams that might not be accessible to traditional sports. We've also seen increasing investment in in-game team cosmetics, right? So various things to create support for fans and for the esport directly in the game by directly monetizing fans. And I mean, the international is always a perennial example of the success of direct to consumer sales, where in 2019, over 34 million was the prize pool of the international, and it was funded directly by the sale of a dedicated in-game battle pass around the international. Only 25% of those revenues went to the prize pool, so the other 75% Valve kept. So it shows the mutual benefit for both the esports teams as well as the publishers in creating exciting things and exciting direct-to-consumer packages. We've also seen other creative ways to inject brands into games. So one of the great examples is Riot Games was very creative in putting in-game sponsor banners for their esports. So by making a partnership, one of the things you can now sell, almost like traditional sports where you might have the ticker on the side of the pitch, instead you now have literal branding directly on the map of the game, which is a great way to deliver value. We've also seen a lot of interest in host city programs, which has been a very exciting new form of monetization, where in traditional sports, many times we've seen cities will bid on events. This hadn't always translated to esports, with typically cities going for more of an esports city approach, looking for permanent investment. The growth of host cities creates a great opportunity, especially for mid-sized cities, for cities to bring young, intelligent talent to the city to create a positive experience there and a positive memory and drive some value into the economy. So it's a very exciting new initiative, and we're excited to see where it goes. Jumping back to COVID, one of the biggest impacts we've seen from the stop of traditional sports has been the enormous growth in esports betting. DraftKings, for example, mentioned that they saw enormous growth occur. There was a report from the UK which also showed, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 times the amount of esports gambling. So sports gamblers, which were looking for somewhere to go, have landed on esports as an alternative option. And some of this but at the same time, we've seen the shift to online drive upsets in esports results, right? So we've seen rookies overperform because they no longer have to overcome issues like stage fright. We've seen unstable connections, and harder to catch cheating may also be impacting the outcomes. So competitive integrity remains a concern and a point of interest in this online world. And finally, one of the most exciting things we saw this year was the launch of Valorant, right? It represents a new esports title that many fans are excited about, and it came out very strong with 756 million hours watched on Twitch and YouTube between April and October. And with the launch of the new esports series from Riot Games, we expect this to be a strong esport title going forward and a new entrant to the market. So that's everything that's happening with esports right now. As a note, if you're interested in the data we showed you or more, we have several platform subscriptions available, which you're always welcome to reach out and get a tour of and see the kind of insights you might be able to find for yourself directly there through our data. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Remer, for insightful sharing and very inspirational perspectives. So